younger, more enthusiastic people, and it's great to see how many we've been able to attract to this conference. And CSIRO in particular has provided generous sponsorship to support this theme. So could you please thank CSIRO for their special support. So 2 of the concurrent sessions today have presentations by people new to the rangelands or people with experience who are keen to pass on their knowledge. Our first 2 plenary presentations this morning also deal with passing the baton. We have Millie Nolan from Humans of Agriculture and Bob Shepherd, recently retired after umpteen years with Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries working in the northern savannas. Bob's talk will be this year's John Milne Memorial Lecture, and he will be introduced by Dr. Paul Novelli, Editor-in-Chief of the Rangeland Journal. They will be followed by presentations on linking climate science and decision-making by Andrew Marshall and biocrusts, ecological indicators in rangelands by Wendy Williams. And finally, just before you all rush off to morning tea, Dana Kelly and Paul Novelli and Noeline Duckett will give us a rundown on the Rangeland Journal and why you should be publishing there, and the Range Management Newsletter and why you should write articles for the newsletter. Now, to introduce our first speaker this morning is Amelia, or Millie Nolan, who's with me here. Millie is a farmer's daughter from regional Victoria. She holds an agricultural science degree from Murdoch University in WA and has diverse experience in various agricultural roles across Australia. She is a passionate advocate for agriculture's future and currently serves as the operations manager at Humans of Agriculture, HOA. HOA is on a mission to share inspiring stories that shape a brighter future. Now, she's a courageous young woman. She lives in Geelong and yet she supports Collingwood. I mean, that is really courageous. So will you please welcome Millie Nolan to the lectern.
Wow, already caught out. Go Pies. So I've actually really thoroughly enjoyed the exercise of looking at the topic of handing over the baton to the next generation. And you'll forgive me if this speech isn't probably as scientific focused as many of your other presentations throughout this conference. And whilst I do have a Bachelor of Science, I love people. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. It's about people. And I'm going to tell you stories. Some of them might be a little bit funny, and most of them are told with a lot of love. And that's why I've called it a baton of storytelling. And there's a very good reason why storytelling is such a huge component of this, and I'll let you in on that little secret a bit later on. But it's been so interesting when I reflected back on, well, what's the baton look like to me? What have people handed me, and what do I really want that to look like? And how can we be progressive and modern while still maintaining and celebrating tradition and legacy? So yeah, I go for Collingwood. And as I was reflecting upon this baton of the next generation, I very, literally thought of it as my dad. He's a farmer, he's a shearer, and I fondly call him Joey. And so if you hear me say Joey, you'll know that I'm referring to my dad. Hopefully there's no GWS supporters in here. If so, don't come and talk to me in the break. And he has, in some ways of the phrase, handed over the baton to me. So I wanted to share with you some of those stories. Keep in mind, he's a shearer who's never taught me to hold a handpiece. He has a fencing contracting business, but he's actually never taught me to strain a post. So actually, the last time I was out fencing with him, I was only allowed to drive the tractor and bang in staples manually. He's since got a staple gun, so that's great. Glad I did that week. But on face value, he's not the best teacher, but he's actually taught me so much. When I was about 10 years old, things in my family started to be not so great as what they were. My mum had suffered a lot, and it was probably starting to really take its toll. She'd lost both her parents. I never met either of them, and she lost both of her brothers, and things were just becoming really overwhelming. And it probably was a really a period of my life that really shaped me, that sort of next decade, like everyone has in their life, when things are a little bit adverse. But when I look back at that time, I don't necessarily think of, the heartache or the pain or the sadness or anger and despair and frustration. I remember my dad's words, and Joey would always say, "I'm so lucky I've got 4 healthy kids, what more could I want?" And I mean that he would say that for literally anything. You'd say, "God, Joey, don't you want to buy a new ute?" He goes, oh no, I've got 4 healthy kids, what more could I want? And this ute, I swear to God, it was this old green Rodeo. I renamed it the Slow Deo, and it spent more time broken down than not. And he just continued to say, "I've got 4 healthy kids, I don't need a new ute." And it really taught me gratefulness. Even though when it came to me turning 18, I could not wait to get out of there. And I would tell him anything, all of my grand life plans, and all he'd say is, "Okay, darling." Go, "Hey, Joey, I think we're going to move to California. Yeah, I think we're going to work in a winery over there." "Okay, darling." I didn't even have a passport at the time. "Hey, Joey, I think I'm going to go backpacking overseas for a couple of months." "Okay, darling." "Hey, Joey, I actually think I'm going to turn down that offer to study in Adelaide, and I'm going to move to Western Australia. Never been there before, don't know anyone, but I've heard it's a really cool place. Going to drive across the Nullarbor." "Okay, darling." And at first I probably thought that, well, I'm the youngest of 4, he's probably a bit sick of these conversations by now. He's done it with all my elder 3 siblings. But I actually think it was one of the greatest, handing over the batons that he's ever done to me, because with him being so relaxed, his trust fully empowered me to do all of those things and more. So that was one of those really great lessons. They did tell me this was dodgy. Yeah, I think so. There it is. So it's pretty cool now that I count him as one of my best mates. We go on holidays together. We spend weekends together watching Collingwood, believe it or not. And last year we drove up from the farm in Victoria, and we were like, well, I've never done the Birdsville track. When I went to do it, it got rained out and I had to go through Bully all the way through Alice Springs. But really wanted to do the Birdsville track, and so off we went. And when we got to Birdsville, we were having a beer at the pub, and I said, "Oh, well, we did that in pretty good time. Do you want to keep on going?" "Yeah, righto. Keep on going to Longreach." So I went back to Longreach, where I used to live. So what's an extra 1,500 kilometres when we just love looking at the land so much, and especially the changing landscapes through there. So I was 25 years old at the time of this trip, and I think it's pretty unique that a 25-year-old young woman would want to spend, at that time I had hardly any annual leave, but that 1 week of my annual leave with my dad, driving through outback Australia with his stinky dog that farted, I swear, the whole time, and sleeping in swags under the stars. But it was one of the best weeks of my life. There were a couple of things that we really, really wanted to see on this trip. One of them was Cordillo Downs shearing shed, and Joey had told me this story of shearers from Adelaide who used to ride their push bikes up the Birdsville track up to this shearing shed just for the chance to have a stand or to work on this station. And it was obviously a pretty incredible shed, but it wasn't that cool. Ride your push bike up. And I don't know exactly what this part of it taught me, but and I think it's funny and it makes me happy, but I think there's something in there about the wonderful tradition and legacy of the Australian wool industry, but also how far it's really come, and then also recognising that we still have such a long way to go. And I don't think the wool industry is alone in that. The second site that we really wanted to see was through Cameron's Corner to Tibooburra. So Joey had been shearing up here about 40 years ago at that time, and he hadn't actually been back since. And he reckons that fence line has aged a bit, and he's sizing it up for a job in that picture on the right. And of course, we had to stop at the pub and have another beer. And we were enjoying this beer when a stranger came up to us, and he said, "Oh, I hope you don't mind, but I just took a photo of you two because you look really funny." Do you mind if I show you? Anyway, he sent it to me, and this was the photo. So I'm glad that I know what I'm going to look like when I'm older. But this stranger didn't know that he'd actually captured a really special moment. And in that moment, Joey had thanked me for bringing him back to Tibooburra. He said he never thought he would. And I hadn't for a second thought that Joey would be thanking me. I was having so much fun, I wanted to thank him. But this stranger had unknowingly captured this beautiful moment, and it was Dad teaching me that, if I can do it and I want to do it, then God, I must bloody do it. He never thought he'd come back, and it was just me saying, gosh, I want to drive the Birdsville track, come on, put down the tools, get off the farm, let's go and do this. And so that was my next lesson. If you can, you must, and don't leave it till it's too late. And so I went to Fiji with two of my best mates, and I was texting him, showing off all these photos to my dad. And he said, oh yeah, I went to Fiji a few years ago. And I went, what? Why have you never told me this? Just never thought to mention it. I said, well, who did you go with? He goes, I went with Maury and Gaza. And now I knew Maury, but I'd never heard of Gaza. So I said, oh, which one's Gaza? And he said, well, actually, Gaza died. He drank himself to death, and unfortunately, Maury is going the same way. It broke my heart a little bit, and very selfishly, I immediately thought of me and my friends, and I hope I never end up in that way. But also, from that gratefulness lesson that Dad had taught me earlier, I remembered to be grateful. And whilst it broke my heart, I said, Joey, I'm so sorry about your mates, but I'm really glad it wasn't you, and I'm really glad you're my dad. And he responded, me too. I'm so rich because of you 4 kids. And I can say this because I'm his daughter, but he actually is a pretty bad teacher at times. You ask him to show you something and his fuse is so short, he's off and he's mad and you're going, oh, whoops, my bad. But when you get him telling stories, he's at his best, and that's how he shares his lessons with me. And I do tease him that he gave me not many things in life. He only gave me some blue eyes, terrible knee and ankle joints, and premature grey hair. But in reality, he gave me so much more than that. He taught me selflessness, taught me gratitude, and he embodies being humble and content. And I actually don't think Joey's put a lot of thought into that. I think that's come to him really naturally. And I thought, well, if he actually focused and told me all these stories about going to Fiji, then maybe I'd have even more. So maybe I should ask him. And so when I was next putting together this presentation, I thought about intergenerations. I thought, well, I feel like I know my generation, but what are we talking about with, the former, the older generation and the next generation, and what does this actually mean? I figured that I probably made a lot of assumptions, like many of us do. So I started to do some research. It was pretty hard, actually, to find this, assumptions between generations, and particularly relating it back to rangelands. It was near impossible. But I happened upon this mob called Mobius, I think I pronounce it, out of Sydney, and they do a lot in marketing. And they said that in Australia, the over 50s market constitutes 27% of the population, hold almost 60% of Australia's private wealth, and hold the purse to 56% of disposable income. But reportedly, only 5% of marketing briefs are directed at this cohort, which I found really interesting. The over 50s consumers purchase approximately 64% of new vehicles, 55% of travel, and 50% of alcohol. Alcoholics in the room. And we went on to say that, we, as in this younger generation who are doing a lot of this marketing, can perceive this older generation as dull and boring and lacking the zest to learn and try new things. But I think, as this research was telling us, it's actually really wrong. You guys are spending money, you're learning, you've got this wisdom and experiences that means that you know how to spend your money and not waste it, like I probably am. And it was really interesting. I sat on the bus on Monday next to a lady, and I didn't ask her age, but I hope she isn't offended by me saying I think I'm lowering the average age in the group, and I think she's increasing it. And we'll leave it at that. But while I was chatting to this really fascinating lady, we got talking about travel. And I mentioned that I might be heading to Hobart over the Christmas New Year's period to see some friends. And she asked me if I had ever seen that video of those people running nude into the ocean in Tasmania in the middle of winter. And she said, how invigorating it must be. And she went on to tell me to never miss the opportunity to go skinny dipping. And so I think this research was right. There is still so much zest for life. And I know that we are absolutely on celebrating the young people in the room, but I also think it's really cool that there's so many people that are here handing the baton over to my generation as well. And the fact that you're all here learning is because you're passionate and because you want to do it and hand the baton over to us. So if we were thinking that you're all boring, well, we have that wrong, don't we? And that got me thinking that that's really not how I want to receive the baton from you. And I actually have a responsibility as well to recognise your investments and want to have that collaborative approach. And so you can infer just from your spending on alcohol and travel and the lovely lady on the bus next to me that giving me her life lessons was that you do have these foundations, experience and wisdom, and perhaps that makes your zest even better. Got it. So it's fitting that I have a job working at an organisation called Humans of Agriculture, and it is essentially a storytelling platform. And this is why storytelling is so important, because when we are 22 times more likely to remember facts when they're wrapped in a story. Not twice as likely or 3 times as likely, but 22 times more likely to remember. That was Jerome Bruner, and he's a cognitive psychologist. And this is why storytelling is so important. So at Humans of Agriculture, the whole focus is on what role we play in shaping a world that's happier, healthier, and more prosperous. And we honour the role that people who produce, move, consume play in that, but we can only achieve that through storytelling, which is really us just connecting and then learning. And so we go on a learning journey for ourselves about things that we're really curious about, and then take people along with us. We've actually got together a bit of a community of, I think it's 28,000 monthly podcast listeners. So if you're a podcast listener, you better look up Humans of Agriculture. And so we invite everyone from leading CEOs to chefs, nutritionists, conscious consumers, farmers to lawyers who have attempted to go up Mount Everest. So it's not always saying that it's, supply chain focused, but it's people focused and it's community focused. And it's created a really engaged community, as we can see from that 28,000, but we wanted to know more about them. So we recently did a survey. And within our community, we have a pretty diverse range of people, from those senior management who are tuning in, but also down to those graduates or entry level. 1 in 5 of them are not working in agriculture. I think that's pretty special. 64% are female. 4 in 5 mid-level managers are female. And 45% either planning or considering their next career move. So we can see that perhaps, some of those traditional stigmas around the community of which makes up agriculture isn't quite like that. And from all of our conversations, even those that are really difficult on things like succession planning or grief, we know that wisdom is learnt, inherited, and experienced. We also know that people prefer content focused on people's stories, because that's where we all soak up those learnings. And when we did this survey, the word that continually popped up was those vulnerable people stories, or those stories where people are vulnerable, or those vulnerable stories. So I thought, right, there's something in that as well. So we're taking steps to look at a future that is progressive and modern, and yet we always try to have in our back of our mind that focus on legacy and tradition. And in fact, over 80% of our audience is under the age of 40, so I think that demonstrates that willingness for people to learn and take hold of that baton. Now, we probably have tough times ahead like we have in the past, and what's just inevitable. Currently, El Niño's been declared. We've caused some damage to land and waterways that we don't really know how to repair. Global warming has been retermed in global boiling. Livestock prices are coming down. We have challenges in regulation, politics, community perception, the list goes on. So we need your help, and I'm talking about that former generation. We actually need you to be vulnerable enough to share some of these stories and lessons, and particularly when it comes to things like land management. For example, I know many of my friends who have since returned to the family properties, but we actually don't remember the millennial drought. We've had some really great years and some really great prices in some areas recently, and they don't know any different, so please share that with us. And I want to use this opportunity to actually congratulate you and celebrate what the Rangelands has put together, because I think that's what sometimes this Australian culture could use a hell of a lot more of that celebration. And what I mean by that is, from my experience, I've got friends who, they might have a bumper crop one year and they go, oh, because parts of the other side of the country are dry. It's like, well, bloody hell, the country's so big and vast, somewhere it's going to be dry at some point. You might as well celebrate it while you can, because sooner or later it's going to be dry where you are. And I learned from the people here today and the other speakers that, nature, agriculture, it's all pretty cyclical. So there's going to be tough times and there's going to be really great times. So let's celebrate how far we've come, whilst recognising all the way that we have to go and recognising that evolution. Like on Monday, where I met one of the 3 Indigenous-led fire groups in the country, I think we can celebrate what that group is doing, but also recognise that perhaps we need more of it, and perhaps that evolution can keep on going. So if you see me or another young person at this conference, can I just ask you to invest in us and tell us a story? And while I've been speaking, just a question, because it's going to be really helpful to gauge if I have actually empowered you, but has anyone actually thought, okay, yeah, I do have something that I'd like to share with the next generation? Can you put your hand up? Okay, that's pretty good. All right, I'm happy with that. Thank you. I hope you come and talk to me. Oh, I'm still going. So done. So I've spoken on stage quite a lot, but actually never, ever like this. On the left, you can see a school captain, I think that speech was, and first big speech in front of a big crowd, and done quite a lot, as you can see, in the middle on these big stages. And I normally walk around, I don't use notes because I'm so confident in my topic, but and I get so much energy from being up on stage that I hope I can still do it when I look like I do on the right. Thanks to Snapchat technology for leaving nothing up to the imagination. But I decided when writing this speech that was my comfort zone. That was really, really my comfort zone. And originally I was going to stick with that. I was going to stick with what I know, which is, livestock and my previous experience in community perception and trying to build that trust. But I decided to share some more personal and vulnerable stories, because I can hardly ask you to do it if I don't do it myself. And that's all I'm asking. Be vulnerable and hand over the baton. And there's things that you've stuffed up for us and things that I'm going to stuff up for the next generation. And that's okay. It's all learning. But please share it with us, because if we don't do that, then I think that's where it'll go astray, and that's where we won't evolve. If I can give an example, and it strikes me as shockingly hilarious, when I was reading this book about years and years ago when we needed to save the trees. So we invented this bloody amazing new thing called plastic. So you can see how things that are being done now are probably not right, and it's an evolution, and that's okay. It's as long as we're doing our best. So thank you for your focus on maintaining the integrity of the land. Thank you for learning from your mistakes, and thank you for passing on some of those lessons. I know that we often begin a presentation or a conference by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, and I think everyone's done a really, really exceptional job of doing that at this conference. But I want to change it up and actually finish by acknowledging them, because not only on this land, but all land in Australia, they've used storytelling for generations, and they've passed on their wisdom of the land and family and their culture. And I think there's something really special in that. So thank you again for handing over the baton, and I can't wait to continue the story. Now I'm done, Don.
Okay,
Now I'm done.
Okay. That was great. Thanks, Millie. Do we have questions while we're getting to the first question? Millie, in reflection of if it's 22 times more better that we hear the new infant facts via a story, what's your observation about how well communication is occurring in agriculture these days?
I think that we're naturally making decisions off a lot of science, and so it makes sense that we are talking in facts and figures a lot of the time. And I think that when we have that shared connection and passion for agriculture, then it's not as profound the effect if you're not using storytelling. But I think if you can weave in a story there and make people feel something, and I wrote it in my abstract, but I can't remember who said this. Oh, I think it was I can't remember. Anyway, check my abstract. But he essentially said, no one cares how much you know until they know how much you care. And I think that if you're going to share facts, then you might as well do it in a story and share how much you know as well. You care.
Questions? Do we have a question? You stunned them, Millie. No, yes, we do. Peter Conradi?
Millie, great speech and good to see you again. I've just got a question. Do you find when you talk about this passing on the baton that sometimes it's hard for people to let go of the baton also?
Yeah, I do. And that's why I use the example of Joey saying to me, like, okay, Darwin, when I was having all these crazy ideas, because his trust was the most empowering thing ever. And so if you can let go, and I promise we'll try and look after it.
Do we have another question somewhere? Gus,
Thanks,
ever reliable.
Millie. Gus White, a farmer, and farmers are notorious, obviously, for not passing on the baton or not passing it on well. I'm sure you've heard stories and are hearing stories of lots of people where they've gone badly and some have gone well, are passing on the trust. Do you have any, are there any strings that you can say, well, I reckon this is a good pathway to pass on some trust, to pass on the baton, to start it?
Yeah, absolutely. And if I'm picking this up, I think you're talking a lot about succession planning, and it's probably one of the most difficult topics that people don't talk about, essentially. And there is some really horrible stories where it has gone wrong, and it does seem a little bit rare that you come across a good story. And when you come across one of those good stories, they don't always want to share it because it is personal, and you do have to be pretty vulnerable and go into some things that you may be not so comfortable with. But from my experience, starting the conversation, I know it's hard, but get the people, the stakeholders involved on neutral ground. That's really important, and begin. And you can do it when the next generation of kids, and that's when it creates that really healthy environment and culture that it's okay to be having these conversations. And then naturally, from those conversations, you've got this open dialogue, and they're thinking about maybe where their journey wants to be, whether it is on farms or whether it's not, and how perhaps that can be supported from the farm. So it is hard. It is hard, but for God's sake, just start, please.
Thanks, Millie. Do we have any other questions at all? Yes, the time for one more question.
Millie, great speech, thank you. David Phelps here. I'm just wondering how we, as rangeland practitioners, managers, scientists, etc., might tap into the storytelling on offer through Humans of Agriculture.
Thanks, Phelpsy. So we do lots of business partnerships, and we really start to work with businesses and people that we're really genuinely curious about. And of course, this is something that we are curious about. And so you can jump on our website, and there's different partnerships options there if you ever do want to get in touch. But if you have a really great story, please do. Our contact details are on the website. And if we're curious enough, then we'll want to share your story. But we do some really great partnerships with businesses as well to elevate that. So our website's a really good place to start. But if you're on the podcast, we can search up Humans of Agriculture, and also on social media as well.
Thank you very much, Millie. We'll have to hold it there, but Millie, of course, is around for the rest of the week. And so grab hold of her and tell her your story. And I think that would be a great thing to do. So will you please thank Millie again for a very interesting presentation.